Well, hello again. Welcome to another episode of Factually Speaking, where facts come first. So, McCarthy Marie and I are your hosts, and today we are dealing with the topic, Dominica's population collapse and its impact on society and the economy. McCarthy Marie, or Mac, for short, as I will call him, program. He's going to talk to us about the topic, share his views and statistics on Dominica's population collapse, and look at how this dire situation has impacted the country's economy and our society. So, Mac, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Tim. I'm glad to be back with you for another program where we are going to help the Dominican population. With respect to the population of Dominica, we have some figures here that show that in 1995, we had 1,501 births. And in that year, we had 584 deaths. Yes? And every year, pretty much from 1995, the population, the number of people being born has declined. For example, in 1996, we had 1,426. 1997, we had 1,340. 1998, 1,236. 1999, 1,293, a slight rise. Then in 2000, 1,199. And then to come to closer to the present time, we have number of births in 2022 was only 658. Yes? And at the same time, the number of deaths was 777 in 2022. Yeah? Which meant that there were 119 more people dying in Dominica than being born. And we've known for quite a while that a large part of the problem has been due to the fact that the number of people being born has steadily declined from 1992, when there were 1,836 births, to 2022, where there were 658. And in 2023, in fact, we had one less birth than 2022, 657. Yeah? And deaths were also higher than births. So we had 87 more deaths than births in 2023, which is last year. This year, we hope for a good crop. In 2 consecutive years, we had negative population increase based on interplay of births and deaths. More people exited the population by death than entered the population by birth in 2 years in succession. And the result of that is that going forward, the population will become more unbalanced than it already is, meaning that the larger portion of the population is basically people over 50. It's going to become larger and larger. And the number of youth and children will obviously be declining if things don't change. And there is a little biology maybe might just spin around there to say that in fact, given the population structure now, or a few years now, it is pretty impossible for the community, particularly the women of Dominica, to bear sufficient children to change the downward slide in the number of people in Dominica.
How did we get here?
How did we get here? Well, we got here because of more than one reason. There are 2 reasons. One is a biological reason, in my opinion, where pollutants, environmental pollutants, particularly chemicals used in agricultural production, bananas more particularly. But there was one product that was used throughout the 80s and in the 70s, even into the 80s, called Nemagon. That was the brand name that the chemical was sold under. The chemical name is dibrochloropropane, better known as DBCP. It's a chemical that's used or was used in the banana business to get rid of nematodes. Yes? So the farmers were happily getting rid of nematodes, unaware, of course, of the danger that applying that product caused to them. And given that the fact that Dominica is a mountainous island, that many banana plantations or holdings are on rather steep or very steep gradients, there's a lot of runoff from the soil into the waterways, which means people who go swimming in the river, for example, at Layo River, where there's hot water, hot spring right in the river, place people like to go and swim. But people are planting bananas and other stuff further up, all the way up to Bells. So some of the runoff from those farms would end up naturally in the river. So a person who is not in farming as such could find himself exposed to these chemicals. Yeah, that's one. And the impact of that particular chemical, was to cause infertility in males, a fact that was known since 1975 in the United States. So that's one impact. Secondarily, there's some social or sociological or societal, as the case might be, features that cropped up. One of them being the fact that women, the female population, went to school or are still going to school much longer than men. So they at the university probably have one degree. They wish to pursue another degree, it may be in the same field at a higher level or some other degree. So they stay in school for a longer period of time. And most women who are in school find it inconvenient or sometimes impossible, at least mentally impossible, to conceive of going to school and taking care of children at the same time. So they put off having children during the period when they are having schooling, at university level. So that causes the women to take action to delay pregnancy and childbearing until they think they're sufficiently educated and they have started on a career or job, as the case might be. Yeah, with the result that the average age at which a woman in Dominica, I had the figures for a couple of years ago, was 28 years. It was the average age at which a woman had her first child in Dominica. And I don't want to say successfully, we might say unsuccessfully, eliminated teenage pregnancy, which means that most of the people who are being born to people who are in their 30s. In point of fact, I have some figures here for births by age of mother. Okay? And it shows that the group of people who are the most children in 2023, this is last year, was the group of people in the age 30 to 34. Yes? They had the most children. 10 to 14 had 0 children. 15 to 19 had 27 plus 32. That's males plus females, etc. So that if that is the peak year in which we are having children, it's very unlikely that those women who are that age or older are going to have any more children.
Peak year meaning what? The 30 to 34 or the 15 to 20? What?
No. 30 to 34. Right. Yeah. Last year, they were the group of persons who bore the most children in Dominica. Okay? That might not have been their first child. Some of them might have been the second or third child, as the case might be. But that is the group that had the largest number of children. And since medical advice says that it's advisable not to have children after the age of 40, that means the childbearing potential of the people who are 30 and 34, 30 to 34, is kind of limited. They aren't going to make 4 children. more, if you follow. That's where we are. And then for those persons who are having their first child in particular, in their middle to late 30s, they are very unlikely to have a second child. Yes, because the pregnancy becomes more difficult and so on. Yeah.
Okay, but let me ask this. You mentioned, in introducing this aspect of the statistic, that is childbearing age and so on, that kind of thing.
Right.
You referred to the attempt to reduce teenage pregnancy as being unsuccessful, right?
Well, it was successful,
right?
Very successful.
Okay, it was successful in the sense that it actually achieved the objective of reducing it. But then you said unsuccessfully, meaning that there was something wrong with it. What was wrong with it?
Yes, something was wrong with it. Yes, what is wrong with it? It's the biology. The biology says the best time for a woman to begin bearing children is late teenage years into in the early 20s. Yeah. So if we have eliminated teenage pregnancy, because here's the thing, teenage pregnancies actually spans quite a wide range of years. It's 13 that when you become a teen, that's the first teen, you become 13 to 19 are teenagers. Obviously, we would prefer if all the teenagers who bore children would be 18 to 19 years old rather than 13 and 14, yeah? Okay, which in our case here in 2023, there was 0 births to people 14 years old, and we had in the 15 to 19 year age range, that's where we had some births. Yeah. Now, because the figures are in ranges, whether these people who had children are closer to the 19 years or closer to the 14 years, we don't know. But that range of persons there did have children. Although they did not have the most children, actually their figures were kind of not too high, actually. There were more people who were older than them who had children, who had more children. 15 to 19 had 27 plus 32. Okay? 20 to 24 had 62 plus 69. 25 to 29 had 70 plus 86. Last year, in the age range 45 to 49, there were only 2 births.
Is that not an age normally that people generally make children, right? By the time they hit 40, they figure...
Which is to say that the females at least obeyed the doctor's recommendations not to have children from after you're 40 years old,
Okay, now you mentioned when you were looking at the teenage, figures and sort of supporting your point that maybe the teenage pregnancy reduction drive was perhaps not the best thing to do. But it did indicate that perhaps it might be preferable if teenagers were going to have children, for them to have them about 18, 19, But do you think, though, quite apart from the biological aspect, that from an economic and social standpoint, that teenagers at 18, 19 are really ready to have children? Well, I mean, forget about the biological.
Of course.
I say from an economic and social standpoint. Right? We're putting aside the biological part.
Yeah. Yes, of course they are. It's the society that is out of sync with the biology. In other words, you should follow biology, not fight against it.
The reason I'm asking, say, at that age, 18, 19, 17, 18, 19, even 19, sometimes up to 20, given the fact that our education system has sort of evolved and the scope has broadened.
Sure.
A lot of these young women or children, teenagers, are still at school.
Yes. Yeah, so why can't they be at school and go
Let's talk
children?
about that some more. I mean, sort of argue your point. Argue your point.
Yeah. Yes, maybe because if you are at school and you have a child, that shouldn't be a cause for not continuing your education. Yes, and if the society had been operating on the basis that, okay, biologically speaking, you are ready to have children, so therefore you have a child, and then you make appropriate accommodations at school for the person to continue their education. He might even, for example, have a press at the school if that's considered necessary.
Okay, so that's a societal arrangement, so to speak. What about economic? I mean, the teenager is still at school, they're not employed, and we know that a lot of teenage pregnancy, the question of an absent father arises, or the father himself is not ready economically to, support a child. I mean, so there's an economic consideration as well.
Well, there's a little thing, people talk about marital economics. That says, two can live for the same price as one. Meaning to say, it doesn't really make much of a big difference. Or if I am living by myself, or if I am living with somebody else, the amount of expenditure we're going to make is going to be pretty much the same. Yes? And the question about having, so to speak, set yourself up economically and so on before you get married, kind of doesn't really make much sense. The two things have nothing to do with each other. Because on that basis, you would be saying that people should get married when they're 40.
Yeah, but I suppose, I mean, we can look at it in terms of the degree to which one is, promoting that, right? But I mean, but if you're going to have children, you must be in a position to provide for them. I mean,
yeah, sure.
Meet the physical needs, right? Yeah,
right.
That is economics, isn't it? Right.
Yeah, sure. Right. It's economics, but people make it out to be much more complicated and difficult than it is. If, for example, Nestle has a bit of a blame to take for some things they've done. Nestle,
okay.
the company.
Nestle,
yes. Right. Okay, I don't know if you heard of the scandal. Talk about a scandal where Nestle was sending out their sales people dressed up as nurses to the maternity wards to convince them that it's best to drink formula for your child to drink formula than to take breast milk. Yes, and up till now, there's still a bit of a campaign in Dominica going on saying breast is best. Yes, well, if breast is best, during the time of lactation and so on, when you are the female person is having milk, for a good few months, the baby lives on milk from the mother, which doesn't incur an expense to feed the child. And logically, when the child is to be weaned, the child could be weaned on the same food that the family is eating. Simply have to make it appropriate for a person who has no teeth. So if you have fish, you just cross up the fish, blah blah blah, make a little soup, and the child can be fed from that. So it's not that difficult to, in point of fact, bring up children as people think.
All right, let's jump back a bit to the infertility aspect, of the raison d'etre or situation now.
For some of these, right?
Population situation, so to speak. Let's talk a little more about that. I mean, you talked about the use of chemicals, Nemagon, you mentioned in particular, which, sort of ended up in our rivers, in the rivers and so on, and poisoned the waters and affected, the men. What sort of statistics do we have to?
Well, nobody did any statistics. Nobody did any, you might say, investigation to find out to what extent the male population's ability to procreate has been compromised.
So on what do you base your assertion then?
Oh, on this here, Dr. Carissa Etienne, when she became PAHO director, she came to Dominica and gave a lecture on primary health care, its importance in, keeping your health system functioning properly at minimal cost. And I went there and I asked her a question. I relayed some of this population information to her. And I asked her if PAHO would be able to conduct a study in Dominica to determine the fertility capacity of the population. Her response was no, that PAHO doesn't do that kind of work, but she knows two organizations that do. And then she goes on to say, but by the way, as you're telling me about this Nemagon thing and so on there, when I used to practice, one of my patients told me he had been compensated by a chemical company for having been made infertile. Yes, and I know that because there was a class action lawsuit that was brought primarily on behalf of workers on those plantations in Nicaragua and Honduras, which I don't think up till now that has finally been settled. The people who claim in compensation for the harm done to them for their fertility and so on. Yeah. So, and I know as well that the people who are doing the class action lawsuit were in Dominica, speaking with people who had been involved in the banana business in particular, planters and people who worked in banana plantations.
The question is here, while the people who were putting forth that class action lawsuit against, the manufacturers of that chemical product.
Actually, it wasn't against the manufacturers as such. It was against the manufacturers to a certain extent, but mostly against Dole,
the company, the banana company.
Right, because the company was aware that the product had been labeled unsafe, and they insisted that the suppliers who had a contract to supply them fulfill their contract. So they never stopped it, knowing full well what the dangers were.
It appears to me, though, from the way you found out about that, from Dr. Etienne, right?
No. I had known about the class action lawsuit before. When she said it, she was confirming to me that Dominican people had been
part of that lawsuit.
In it. Yeah.
But the fact is, what sort of impact did it have on the country? I mean, having found out that, this was happening and that Dominican farmers had been identified as part of the group that was affected, what sort of effect did it have on Dominica in terms of our response to that?
Well, none, because as part of those deals, one of them is to take the money and keep quiet. Not to mention which man in Dominica would go about taking out an ad in the newspaper to say, I have been made infertile. No man is going to say that. So that keeps very quiet. And since nobody is making any fuss, the authorities don't make any fuss.
So the authorities, knowing that, Dominican farmers were exposed to that, dangerous pesticide and the effect it was potentially having on them, why would they not want to? It was affecting their population, and with the potential to have the effect that you're talking about now, reduction in fertility and therefore an effect on your negative effect on your population growth. So why would they not want to do something about that then?
Well, there are many potential reasons you can think of. One of them being if you are the government and you were responsible for allowing different chemicals into the island or not, that you allowed these chemicals to come in. So you would be, in a sense, delinquent in your responsibility to look after the health of the nation.
So you're saying that two things happened. Two, if you will, irresponsible things from the standpoint of the authorities. One, the farmers were not, there was no effort to educate the populace about the dangers of, or was there?
Part of the problem also is that we rely on foreign agencies to tell us what products have what chemical effect, etc., etc. So when you can't do it yourself and you're dependent on somebody else, then unless you ask the right question at the right place and so on, you will not know the answer, because the general feeling is that if it's allowed for sale elsewhere, it's okay.
But right now, today, I think our awareness of the dangers of pesticide use, right, the use of chemicals, is pretty well known, right? I mean, and promoted, and therefore, hopefully, the farming population would have responded,
One of the ways the farming population, particularly the banana farmers, stopped using that chemical was fair trade, because the fair trade agreement required that there were some chemicals you had to stop using immediately. That fair trade actually didn't investigate whether anything was wrong. What fair trade did was to say, we can offer you an opportunity to sell your bananas through usage of our brand. But for us to allow you to use our brand and set up the whole fair trade arrangement, you had to do a certain number of things. One of them was to stop using certain chemicals immediately, not to allow your children to work on the farm with you, except out of school hours and there's no school, etc. Yeah, and a couple other things. So in that, might say, foreign imposition, those chemicals and some others had to be stopped for the farmer to take advantage of the fair trade opportunity.
So then would you say that given that that situation affected a particular generation of farmers, and that today the threat no longer exists, and therefore it should not be a risk or danger to population growth?
Right. However, there's this dip. There would have been a dip in the number of people who are having children, because depending on how many people exactly were exposed, there would have been a dip, which means that after they come out of the dip, their children, which might be 1 or 2 instead of 4 and 5, may not be large because of that. And with respect to females, you would expect, or it's a hypothesis in any case, a fairly large number of infertile women, because one of the major causes of infertility in women is something called polycystic ovary syndrome, which is heavily associated, or tightly associated rather, with obesity. And I've seen more than one report that described Dominican women as the most obese in the Caribbean, not complimentary at all. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of the women are infertile. As we mentioned earlier, it was about the question of women making the conscious effort and decision to put off pregnancy until they finish their education, which ends up being when they're 30 or thereabout,
What is the significance, of a population collapse?
You have a population collapse, which then follows by economic collapse, or accompanied with an economic collapse. For example, the Dominica Water and Sewage Company has adjusted its rates that it charges consumers, which many people in the society think it's outrageously high. The main reason for that has to do with the lack of economies of scale, meaning to say, if the WASCO is to set up a water system, it costs them the same amount per mile to lay pipes and so on and so forth to bring the water to 20 people as it does to bring the water to 400 people. Yes? So therefore, when you set up the system, the 20 people who are actually buying the water from the WASCO, they have to pay for all the expenses of setting up the system and maintaining it. Yes? Similar thing happens with electricity. On the east coast of Dominica, practically nobody living there, but everybody has electricity, and therefore the cost of the electricity all over the island is much higher because of that. Because a person who lives along the roads on Portsmouth, where the generating stations are, they don't actually have to have the same number of poles servicing them, nor the same length of wires and so on to service them.
So the assumption here is that it will cost the company, the utility company, the same amount. They'll have to bear the same cost in getting electricity to 70,000 people as they would to 150,000. Is what you say?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Because, for example, St. Lucia is a small island than Dominica. It has about three times as much the population as Dominica has. So the population is dense, has the greater density than Dominica. So that if you consider, for example, bringing water to, or electricity, any one of them is okay, to a section of, in St. Lucia, when the stations are set up and the electricity is delivered, they have the substations and so on, it serves maybe 50,000 people. A similar setup in Dominica might be serving 20,000 people. But basically they buy the same equipment from the same suppliers and so on. So all the cost per person to set up this system in Dominica is higher. So each person who buys electricity or buys water from the Wasco must pay a higher amount for the amount of water he's using. Otherwise, the company cannot provide the water at all.
Okay, what is the connection between, say, the population of a country and its productivity, its job situation, so to speak?
Well, here's the situation.
Let me clarify. Let me qualify this, right? The reason I'm asking is because one might think that the more people you have, the more populous a country is, the more difficult it is going to be for it to provide, to generate employment, the country that is, for its workforce.
No. Here's the situation. Your population has to be innovative and have capacity to come up with new ideas and new things. Yes? So a population, let's take China. China is a quintessential population country with respect to that. We all know China was a pretty poor country, poorer than Dominica really, back in the 1980s, coming in the 1990s, when they decided to put a particular theory to work, the theory of Arthur Lewis. Here is his picture on the $100 bill. That's why his picture is there. It's because he wrote a theory of economic development with unlimited supplies of labor. He essentially says if your country is lagging behind and it's poor, but you have lots of people, you can effectively use that population to produce manufactured goods that do not require a lot of capital, so that the little bit of capital that's available within your country, as well as from foreign investors, can be sufficient to take people out of agriculture and have them working in factories. Yes, and then the people in agriculture must then step up their productivity to be able to supply food for themselves as well as for the workers in the cities. This is what China did successfully, based on Arthur Lewis's theory of economic development with unlimited supplies of labor, for which he got a Nobel Prize, by the way.
That's right. But tell me frankly, did China actually base its development model, so to speak, on Sir Arthur Lewis's theory, or it was just coincidental? Or did China actually decide, well, I'm going to use Sir Arthur Lewis's theory to approach development?
He got a Nobel Prize in economics, right? Which means that lots of people were referencing his work. So the person might not actually have read Arthur Lewis's work, but he might have read somebody's work who references Arthur Lewis's work, who was inspired by and continued the development of Arthur Lewis's theory. Yes? So the people in China might not have known or decided that there is this Arthur Lewis theory there that we could put to use. But they did. They happened to do it.
Right. So they happened to use that theory, and it worked for them. And I assume that you're not only using China as an example, it would have worked in other places around the world as well. Okay. We have established, in this, what we've discussed so far, that there is indeed a population crisis in this country. Okay? And people have talked about it in many different ways, but not in as informed and factual or statistically laden way that you have on the program today. So now that we've established that, we have a population collapse, or it is collapsing, it has collapsed and continues to collapse, because the last figures we had indicated that, which a dire situation, which show no signs of reversing, so it means it's going to continue. So what do we do about it? What can we as a country do to reverse or to stop and possibly reverse that trend?
Well, there are two other metrics that we have to measure. That is the outflow of population from Dominica and the inflow. Generally, in most years, we have a higher outflow of persons from Dominica than persons who come into Dominica. But in some years, we actually have had more immigrants coming to Dominica than we had emigrants leaving Dominica. So, in a situation where your population dynamics are such that your local population are unable or is unable to reproduce itself, the only way to prevent the total collapse from happening when there literally be nobody here would be to invite foreigners to come to live and reside with us. And we have to set up a targeted immigration program. Yeah? So that's the only thing that can really solve the situation.
And how do you see the immigrants coming into the country being, well, obviously they will bring about a growth in population. There will be more people, right, in the country. But how do you see them contributing to the development of the country? I mean, how can they be effectively utilized so as not to become a burden on the country? Just more people in the place, who will not necessarily have a better way of life. Mm-hmm.
Well, they contribute like all immigrants contribute to the countries to which they go. Like Dominicans are in the United States, they're in Guadeloupe, they're in Antigua, everywhere, and they are contributing to those countries. And when they left Dominica, they didn't have bags of gold or bags of dollars. They went there and they used the skills that they had to get work. And they found work, they founded companies and hired people, etc. So the immigrants who come to Dominica, we'd expect a similar situation from them, from 2 points of view. One, the person who is coming into Dominica, what me and you see here as obstacles to the person, he sees it with a different angle. He is likely to see it as an opportunity that can, work out. And if you just think about what immigrants have done in Dominica, we just mentioned the Nassif family. Mr. Philip Nassif, who, he recently died. He was running and operating Dominica coconut products for quite a while. But his father came to Dominica as an immigrant who had suitcase wasn't full of gold or dollars or any such thing.
Suitcase as a boy being full of cloth or fabric. Good material,
Right, gabardine. Right. Okay, and they started.
Well, if not he himself, but at least, his father, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay, and he lived in Dominica, he still lived in Dominica and so on, and Philip and the others continued to set up DCP, which became Dominica's biggest manufacturer. And at one point in time, DCP was the only exporter of manufactured products from Dominica. So the entire export of manufactured products came from one facility. Yes? And that facility gave many Dominicans work in all different ways. For example, farmers had a place to dispose of their coconuts. Because previously you made the coconuts into copra and we shipped it to Barbados. And then we imported the red butter, red orange butter in the steams for consumption. And he set it up so that we could then be exporting oil to carry come.
But that's one example.
And then eventually,
one shining example of an immigrant, right, to this country being able to create wealth, a lot of wealth and prosperity. But let me just ask this. And there may be some others, like him. He was not the only one. Or the Nassif family wasn't the only one. There was others, like the Astapans and so on. But should the government, in putting in place a policy, right, for increased immigration into this country, a sort of a concerted effort to get more people to come in large numbers, right, to this country, should they just leave it up to what you have described, that people among them will be, people with entrepreneurial spirit and so on, to come in here and do well, good, create businesses and create wealth? Or should there be other considerations? I mean, not everyone who comes as an immigrant is going to have that entrepreneurial spirit, is going to be capable of the ability, to achieve what the people like the Nassifs and so on. What of the other people who just come in looking for a way of life, looking to get a job? What should the authorities be concerned about in putting this policy in place?
Let me just give you an example. You know of a car, famous car made by Elon Musk, a company called Tesla. I don't know if right, everybody knows about Tesla. But not many people know that Tesla invented AC current. Tesla also invented radio. Yeah. And at that time, America didn't have visa and so on to enter. You simply jump on the boat and you sailed away to America. And they received you generally in New York city area there, right? And or basically they will say it is, well, here you are, land of opportunity, see what you can do. The Tesla man I was talking about there, he was an engineer. When he went to America, his job was digging ditches for Mr. Edison to run his electric lines. And he eventually ended up inventing AC current, as well as inventing radio. Most people may know the inventor of radio and so on as Marconi. Yes, okay? But it was actually Tesla who did it. And he came to Tesla's lab in New York City after Tesla had given a lecture in London. And he came to say, well, I'm very interested in what you're saying there and so on. So Tesla said, sure, no problem. Come, let's go in the lab and do some work. And then he went back to the United Kingdom and used what he learned from Tesla. And
in those days, trademarking, so to speak, didn't exist.
He got a patent.
Oh, patent, yeah.
So he set it up and made the first broadcast before Tesla could have finished this thing and make his first broadcast. But Tesla is the one who actually had invented radio. So I'm saying all of that to say that nobody asked Tesla if he's coming here to invent radio or invent anything. Yes, and his job when he started was digging ditches.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying, Mark, that in putting in place a policy, right, an immigration policy with the aim of bringing as many people as possible, obviously, okay, I was saying obviously you will have a target, you will have parameters, right, but one ought not to concern themselves with, that is the authorities, with having an environment that will provide, job opportunities for those people coming in. Ideally, those people will come in and you will find innovators and entrepreneurs and so on among them, and they will get this. And we don't need,
we don't need all that many entrepreneurs to start new business, Just consider the impact that DCP, which is, let's say, the one entrepreneur who already did it, let's put it this way, caused on the whole Dominican society. So one entrepreneur with a good idea transforms the entire society. So, and even, for example, we'll talk about Haitians as immigrants and they're not sure, they think so. sewing, making ready-made, not ready-made, tailor-made clothes was a thing that practically died in Dominica, until the Haitians started coming, and one of them, you call him King, that's not very Israeli, that's a pseudonym, opened a little factory to make clothes. Who started off with Creole clothes and so on, then he started making regular clothes all the time. And he in Dominica became very well known as a businessman who was employing Dominicans in his place sewing for him. And then he set up a security company in which some Dominicans are also working. So we've had, to a certain extent, these examples of entrepreneurial spirit. When he came to Dominica, I don't think he had any idea in his head what he was going to do. When he got here, he said,
well, he probably came with that skill, huh?
Right.
Yeah, of tailoring,
right. So when he
had
came
that
here,
skill,
he said, but there's an opportunity here because nobody seems to be making clothes, unique things on. So he jumped into it, and then he expanded, and that brought Dominicans. I don't be a little careful with that, but since he's been doing that, other Dominican persons have started up similar. Yeah.
Actually, just recently I was listening to a radio program, and there was this guest who is a seamstress, and she was talking, about her life, working life as a seamstress and her contribution in that area. And one of the points that was made, I'm not suggesting that she was the one who made it, but perhaps a caller who suggested that that Dominicans per se are not taking much of an interest in tailoring and seamstress, or what's the noun for seamstress, and whatever, sewing. That actually Haitians have taken over. That's the point that was made, that there are more Haitian seamstresses and tailors in Dominica than there are Dominicans, Right? Okay. Quite apart from the employment aspect, of immigrants coming in, there are other, there are other things.
There are other considerations.
What are some of those?
Consideration is actually culture. The culture will change, and it is changing, although we might not notice it because everything in these domains tend to move so slowly that it looks like nothing is happening, but the culture is going to be shifting and changing. For example, you're going to find more and more people talking Mandarin because we have sent so many students to study in China. When they come back, they know Mandarin. They can teach it to their children. They can speak to each other, those who have been there in Mandarin. So you might go in, and of course, the local Chinese population, they will be able to speak with them in Mandarin just as well. So that is one of those things that I expect could happen. And with respect to Haitians, there is you might say, a belief floating around the society that Creole language is going to die because the children not learning Creole and they're not speaking it and so on. But the Haitian children are speaking it to themselves with their parents, etc. So it's not dying that way we think. When you get the Haitian child who is out of school situation and speaking, they speak English like Dominican, and they speak it just like the same accent as us. You wouldn't know anything to do with Haiti unless you saw them talking with their parent or something.
But what about, we know in other situations, right, of immigrant societies, right, that there have been instances of, if you will, a lack of integration, right, into society by those immigrant groups, and so you find certain sectors, right, within the society, going to Chinese, Haitians, Indians, kind of stick together. How do you think, is there something that you think we should guard against in implementing such an immigrant program?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. In point of fact, I wrote an article about that in Dominica News Online. I think the title was Haitians, Problem or Solution. Yeah. Where I was saying essentially that I was laying out these figures here. not in detail, but saying that this is what is happening and we need to have immigrants to make the economy function better.
But then what do we do to ensure that this doesn't happen? The lack of integration, into society by those groups.
You do that. The fact that you've identified it already as a potential source of conflict, we must then put in place programs and policies that negate that. In other words, we should try not to have Little Haiti, Pequeno Santo Domingo, and Chinatown, and whatever else, So that's where the housing policy would be key to make sure that people don't end up being segregated by their former nationality, if you want to say that. Yeah, so that everybody is harmoniously living together rather than having some groups here, other groups over there, and so on,
Dominica, you want to ensure that while you encourage and you welcome immigrants, but you want to ensure that they're properly screened so that they don't bring in the disease. It is not a segregate. It's not a discriminatory move, right? It's just a protective measure, for right.
In these processes, and then the immigrants. I think we should immediately, if you're an immigrant and you come to Dominica, you are immediately allowed your immigrant status or your immigrant card or whatever you call it, resident card or whatever, should allow you to go out and do business just like any other person in Dominica, rather than being restricted to being an employee.
Education would also be a consideration, right? Because you want to ensure that your education system caters,
Yes, for sure.
Because, for example, you may have, we go back to Haitians again coming in, and while it is true some Haitians speak a certain amount of English is taught, I think, in schools in Haiti, but not all of them are capable of speaking English fluently, right? So therefore, I'm just saying that you have to, even us here in Dominica, we have not yet fully integrated Creole into our school curriculum. We have not yet done that. And therefore, it's not like we have a system that's already ready to accommodate someone coming in who speaks a foreign language.
Mais écoutez ça. Mais par exemple, il y a l'école pour apprendre créole. Mais il y a des gens qui vendent à Week magazine en créole, en ozo. Même, il y en a en anglais, il y en a en créole. Je dis, bam ça, en créole. Oui, parce que je lis ça, je peux lire ça.
C'est c'est Dominicien. C'est Dominicien qui a écrit.
Vous parlez créole.
Il a écrit avec magazine en créole.
Oui. Témoin Jéhovah, oui. Je baille en créole. Ce livre-là même fait en créole, écrit en créole. Au moins, je pense ça qui est en anglais, je pense ça qui est en créole.
Okay, so you say that to say what?
To say that, well, if you have to learn a new language, you learn it. And the people who come here to work, especially those who already left school and all of that, they might be a little more challenging for them to write it because, but they can, interacting with people, they will learn to speak the words. They might not be able to read it. So if you want these people to be fluent in English, you would have to set up facilities where they could go and learn English in a formal way in school. Probably many people in Dominica should also go there as well because we do not speak English in Dominica. We doesn't speak English in Dominica, No.
We can't do anything about the population decline right now. What, in your view, are the numbers that we need?
Well, I would think, if I were asked my opinion, that we should aim for 100,000 people in, say, 10 years' time.
Are looking at bringing in about 30,000 people over the next 10 years, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, which would be a number that we could integrate and that would fit in with the society. Yeah.